All right, so we will go ahead and start. Councilor Iverson is here until Councilor Munson arrives, and then they're going to swap seats at that moment. But we're here to talk about the convention center, and I don't know who wants to start. We have copies of capital improvement board ordinance we passed this morning that we're getting made, and they're going to be handed out momentarily. But I don't know if anybody from the city wishes to begin. We can go from there. Go ahead, Jeff.
I do have a few comments that I wouldn't mind making if everybody would indulge me. I mean, first of all, my strong preference is that an expanded convention center be run by a public entity rather than a private one. And right now, the Capital Improvements Board still appears to be the best option for a public owner. Yes, some of the transparency and reporting requirements can be built into the bylaws of a private corporation. But what's the remedy for the public if those requirements are violated? If any member of the public believes that they have evidence that a public body like the county council has violated the open door law, they can contact the public access counselor. But what's the remedy for a member of the public with a private nonprofit corporation? I mean, I guess they can file a lawsuit, but that's a pretty high bar. I'd really like to hear the city administration address that issue. How can the public be given protection equivalent to that of a public body? The other point I've heard against a public entity is that the commissioners would get a veto over any bonding, even though the bonding would be done on revenues controlled entirely by the city. And I just don't think that's the way it would need to work. The bonding would only have to go through the commissioners if the revenue source is statutorily directed to the CIB, which it isn't in the case of the food and beverage tax. The city would still be able to bond with their own food and beverage tax, and with the city local income tax as a credit enhancement, as they proposed earlier. The city could still bond and have their bond approved by the city council and still use the public entity as a governance model. In fact, from what I see of the powers of a CIB, the city would have to have control of the bonding and would move forward with their own bonding and join in with the CIB for governance of the new as well as the old facility. Now, there clearly is an enthusiasm gap between the city and the county commissioners on moving forward with convention center expansion. I think that's a fact. I understand that concern on the part of the city, but I do think the commissioners' move to create the CIB earlier today demonstrates that they're willing to move forward. I really hope the city takes yes for an answer there. And then I guess the one other comment I'd want to make related to the city's proposal is that the city would definitely be taking a risk vis-a-vis the innkeeper's tax. I mean, the current innkeeper's tax is needed entirely to support the existing convention center. And I would hope my colleagues as well would certainly never vote to starve the Monroe County or the Monroe Convention Center of resources in order to support a new facility. So that's kind of my brain dump of what's going through my mind at the moment.
Great. Thank you, Councilor McKim. Anybody want to respond from Janet? Listen.
Can you hear me? I'd be happy to share. Can y'all hear me okay?
Yes.
Very sorry I couldn't be there today in person, but wanted to make sure. I know this was the date selected a few weeks ago, so I wanted to make sure I attended even remotely. Appreciate your letting that happen. We are very excited about moving forward from the city administration, indeed enthusiastic about the new convention center expansion since 2016. As we've outlined in great detail and publicly and with lots of notice and shared lots of documents, we do think the 501c3 approach is the better approach, and I'll talk a little bit about that if we can. First, I do want to note that we've said for a long time this is a long needed expansion. The money has been dedicated to it. The markets are recovering. The legislature is watching. And of course, we're very comfortable and excited about the experience of helping steer a large project, as well as having the site identified and funding and all of that And indeed, we kind of have a great fortune of having two hotels that are right nearby that can become convention center hotels, as well as a garage, a much expanded garage right nearby. So city administration is ready to help a 501c3, a board, design and build a new convention center expansion. with the land and the TIF money and the food and beverage revenue, the TIF money that we use to help buy the land. Now, I want to make a couple points about it. First, any new facility would be operated fully integrated with the current facility. There's no plan to do anything otherwise than having the full convention center amenities and capacities operated in an integrated way. And also make very clear that all this would be done coordinating with everybody, from county commissioners to county council to all government entities, city council, of course, including private sector and including people who aren't as convinced or aren't as enthusiastic about it. I think that's fine to have at the table. Let me clear up a couple things about the 501c3. The tort claims issue is a non-issue. I mean, county staff have indicated that themselves. As we've mentioned, both in the written comments and orally, and I'll repeat today, the open door, open process, annual public budget, all that can be guaranteed in bylaws that are binding and can't be changed without approval of public bodies and such. And we're happy to agree with that. We think that's really important. We've made clear, and I'll talk about the meeting this morning in just a minute, but it's a nothing's going to happen without a very inclusive process. There are at least 4 public entities that have to agree on moving forward, including the city council, including the county council, of course, with its approval of the tax and its annual approval of the CVC budget, including the Convention and Visitors Commission has to approve any expenditures annually, which are essential for a new expansion wherever it comes from. The CVC is going to have to identify how to operate an expanded facility wherever it is, however it's structured, as well as, of course, the Food and Beverage Tax Advisory Commission, which is a joint city county body. So those 4 bodies have to approve regularly any activities. And so there's a lot of public input. Council Member McKim, let me just note, those are interesting additions, which I appreciate you raising. In terms of a remedy for the public, if there's public member who's concerned about the operations of this 501c3, there are regular reviews of the 501c3's operation, and we can structure so that if there's any question, and go to city council, can go to county council to have a question about CVC, of course, the annual appropriation, which will be essential to operation. All those public entities are available if there are concerns about that, which I don't think there will be, but if there are, certainly that's the way to go forward. The risk with the innkeeper's tax, which you just referenced, I guess that risk is true in terms of that innkeeper's tax is what is needed to support any convention center operations of whatever size, whether it's expanded or not going forward. And we certainly appreciate the 501c3 would need to work very closely with the CVC, or it's not going to work. So all that's just fine. Now, I do want to note, I have to just note, it was a shock, a surprise move at the 10 a.m. commissioners meeting. There was no notice to any of us about that plan, no sharing of the ordinance, and no real opportunity for public comment. Most of us didn't know what was going. In fact, we called the county attorney this morning and said, "Hey, what is this topic?" And they said, "Well, they don't know, and they'll find out at the meeting, and there's no draft that they had." And so anyway, that was a surprise, and in my view, not very collaborative, but that's okay. We're trying to share all the documents. But I do think I think we agree, the comment was made, let's let the community choose, councils, community choose about what's the best path forward. I think it's kind of fine to have 2 options with the different views. It's maybe not surprising there are different views about how to go forward, because there's been a different view from the beginning. Not everybody agreed with the MOU, which we tried to do. Not everybody agreed with the tax. So it's not a surprise that there are a couple of options of how to go forward. We'll be happy to share more details in the very short weeks ahead about a 3-year process that we are ready to lead and help move forward with a 501c3 to build and open a facility by late 2025. It's basically a 3-year process, at least from when we pull the trigger on moving forward. If the choice that people make to go another direction, we're happy to kind of step back from the administration and step away and let that process go forward, make land available to purchase if that's what's desired, et cetera, et cetera. How the funding can flow is certainly fine. I guess I'll just close by saying I do think in that choice, our enthusiasm is very strong to make sure this works. Our record of success is very strong. I think if you look at, some of you may recall, I talked in 2016 about 4 pearls on the string of the beeline and the importance of moving all those forward. And in the last 6 years, we've opened Switchyard Park. We've opened the Trades District with this, the mill and housing nearby, the fastest growing co-work space in the state. And and Hopewell is going very well too. That's a total of about $70 million invested in those 3 big projects moving forward. This 4th one has not moved forward, I think in part because of the lack of enthusiasm and difficulty of agreeing. So I think it's fine if there's a choice about how best to move forward. I would close by saying I do hope the county, and again, it's totally fine to have different views about the project, different enthusiasm levels, different questions about it. I know the county has a huge project of the criminal justice reform in front of you. We want to be and are supportive of that. That's been a 20-year process at least of looking at that jail. It needs to happen, and the Juvenile Justice Center too is of course part of that, and that's been a very long process, and we very much hope that can move forward well. And anyway, we will work closely to put this plan out and let the community decide on what the best way forward is. And I'm happy to answer questions about CIB concerns and others which have been referenced, but we also tried to articulate that in documents that we've shared. And I will say, it's been a little frustrating all year not being able to sit down and really talk in detail. And this is another example of a kind of a meeting with an agenda set by others, and it's not an easy place for give and take. And we wish we'd been able to do that over the last 11 months, but we agree it's really important to get this going, and we're ready to move forward. And let's just let the folks decide what the best path forward is that's likely to lead to success.
Commissioner Githens, did you want to have a comment?
Yeah, I'm a little disturbed by things I just heard. We've offered multiple meetings, Mr. Mayor, and this is the first time you've shown up. So let's stop that. Also, how would we get community input when we don't have an election going on? So we've had a lot of community input. We've had time for community input. What I've heard, and I think I've knocked more doors recently than anybody else in the room, is that people in the community want this done. They're saying, we've paid the taxes for the food and beverage tax. Get off of the dime here. We've got to have something done. With regard to the tort claim issues on a 501c3, I don't understand why a single cent of taxpayer dollars should be used to pay for any kind of liability insurance every year, not just 1 year, but every year, when it's available at no extra cost under a CIB. And when you talk about a sharing of an ordinance today, that really rankles me. There was no sharing of plans for the annexation from your office. There was no sharing of purchase of the Bunga Robertson property when this happened. There's just been a lot of non-sharing from your office. And so please, let's drop those things. Either we're going forward or we're not. And we are really convinced that a CIB is the best way to protect public assets, public tax dollars. And we've been saying this for several years now.
Yeah. Did you want to add anything right now, or could we go to the city council? We can go to this. Okay. And council members have anything?
Thank you. It has always been my hope that we could do this together. City, council, in cooperation. I knew not about your plans to pass the CIB today, but I'm delighted to hear it, and I'd love to join forces with that effort, because I do agree that a public entity is much more transparent. It's much more accountable to the public, who, as Ms. Githens has pointed out, expects us all to work together, come together, and get on with this in a respectful, cordial manner. So I am convinced this is the right way to go, and I would certainly be happy to discuss any alternatives today. I do want to address this enthusiasm gap too, because we hear this a lot, that they don't want it, we do, therefore we should do this by ourselves. And I think that's been disrespectful, because I'd like to hear from all of you what your true feelings are about this. And is there an enthusiasm gap? Because if there isn't, let's be done with that. Let's stop with the who wants it more, and let's do this together. That's where I'm standing right now, as one of 9 on the city council.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Councilmember Scamblera, did you want to add anything?
Your microphones are different, so I'm trying.
Red light off, green light on. There you go.
We appreciate that. My questions are similar. I'm interested. I don't, at this point, I don't have a pre-made decision in my mind about a CIB or a nonprofit. But I think we have heard what was characterized for the first time today. I heard it as a difference in levels of enthusiasm. And I am sincerely wondering, do you all agree with that characterization? And more to the point, if indeed there are different levels of enthusiasm for moving this project forward quickly, how do you think that's going to play out? It's okay if there are different levels of enthusiasm, but I'm wondering how you see that playing out from your perspective as commissioners. Does that question make sense?
It does in a way, but let me just address it this way. We approved by a vote of 3-0 to form a capital improvement board to do this. So there's your answer, right? So, and the next task would be selecting people to serve. And then we let go. And we let the professionals do their work. So I'm not sure that that gap would matter at any point. And that's the point of it as well, because that's, you make your appointments and you, every 2 years on a staggered basis, we make our appointments. City makes appointments, county makes appointments, and they do their work. And that's the point. That's the point. I was likewise a little concerned by some of the language I heard from the administration today. We'll take the lead. We don't need anybody to take the lead. We should be leading together collaboratively, as was promised to the county council back in 2018 when they passed the food and beverage tax. They were told, we're going to work collaboratively with the county. If the city administration does not trust the commissioners, I can't help that. But what we can say is that it is important to note that we do trust the county council and the city council to pay attention to this and to do the right thing. They're going to have to make a decision about whether they're okay with a 501c3 structure or not. And the reason we passed the Capital Improvement Board ordinance today, and the reason it will expire at the end of the year if nobody does anything, is because we see this as the only viable alternative. And it will ensure that we're working together. It will ensure that the Capital Improvement Board is leading as is appropriate. And it will ensure that taxpayer dollars are accounted for using public access counselor if needed. It will make sure that the meetings are not only public, but where public comment will be invited and will be part of the process. Full transparency. And that's what we're looking for. And yes, you could write it into a bylaw, but to try to enforce a bylaw is much more difficult than a state sanctioned, which other counties use for their convention centers, capital improvement board. And yeah, it would be expensive. It's not a free service. So that's why we passed what we passed today.
Mhm.
But we have put a time limit on it because we don't want to dither. And if nobody else wants to dither, which I've heard a lot, we don't want to dither. So let's move forward. This is a path forward. And we don't see a 501c3 as viable, especially for our community. And we certainly aren't interested in handing over, giving away property, which brings me to the second thing that was upsetting to hear. Because now what I've just heard from the administration is we will sell you land for the convention center. And that was not part of the deal before. So that adds a new wrinkle that we're going to have to consider.
And I appreciate those points, particularly again, reiterating the differences between a CIB and a nonprofit. I want to steer us back a little bit and put a finer point on my question, which was on the enthusiasm gap, because I think everyone is looking at everyone around the table saying, what do we think we can expect of this individual or this group? What do we, I think we're all asking that, that's fair. And either one meeting ago or two meetings ago at most, we actually have comments on record indicating skepticism that we even needed a convention center expansion. And this morning you passed the CIB. And I think, you know, the creation of the CIB is a very encouraging move, and I'm glad to see that. But I guess as the newest elected official in this room at the moment, how do we get from there to here? How do we get from skepticism about whether or not there even needs to be an expanded convention center to let's pass the CIB 3-0 this morning? And I'm just curious if you could enlighten me some.
I did express some skepticism over the future of all convention centers. I'm not convinced that it's a business that will continue as society changes. I was expressing personal opinions, and I made that clear at the time. I was not trying to talk for the other commissioners, for the public, for any, that was my personal feeling about it. I don't actually see why a difference in enthusiasm would be such an important thing. And I think in our case, most of what may have affected our enthusiasm has been the fact that the administration from the beginning made it clear that they planned to take the lead. And we never agreed to anything of that sort. It was repeated again today. And we don't understand why that should be the case. We don't understand why we can't cooperate to do it together.
Mhm.
And in the end, a CIB seemed to be the best way for it to go forward with complete transparency and without anyone trying to claim all the, what's the word I'm thinking of?
Authority.
Yeah, yes, all the authority.
Okay. And I know Commissioner Thomas, you actually offered comments to the effect of you weren't hearing any feedback, suggesting that a new or expanded convention center was in order. And I understand that those were personal views that you shared. But you shared those in a meeting and you expressed
Right.
that skepticism. How did we
Absolutely.
get from there to here?
Because I'm listening to a lot of different people in the community and people who have
Okay.
expressed a great deal of concern about continuing with the tax and putting money into this, and what if it doesn't work? I'm sharing what I'm hearing. And
you're listening-
and I am listening to a lot of different voices in quite a range of opinions. And I still have my own personal concerns, ensuring that this is truly economic development that will spread beyond low wage jobs. That's my concern. But as things are moving forward, I look at it this way. When the administration said, it's our way or the highway, we'll just work on our own. The response that I have, first of all, was fine, go ahead, do it. We'll work on our end of it, you work on your end of it, we'll make it work together. But that's not in the public interest. And I have to put public interest above my own initial reaction to being told, no, we're gonna go it alone, we're gonna do a 501c3. And that public interest is for transparency's sake. So if we're going to do this, we should do this in the public eye with a capital improvement board that meets publicly, takes public comment, and has their accounts reviewed by at least one elected body. And that is the only responsible way forward. And that's why I voted yes today. So that's my enthusiasm. My enthusiasm is for transparency. Oh, go ahead, Jeff.
I'm happy to weigh in, but also don't want to jump the line. I can't see if there are others who wanted to speak, so.
Go ahead, Mayor.
Okay, thanks. I'm trying to figure out, I'm a little struck by political commentary, I guess, in some ways, or kind of what feels like posturing a little bit, but and I am surprised annexation got brought up. That was a surprise. I didn't know we'd reference that, which was certainly an extremely public process. I did want to clarify on liability insurance. I think it's important to note that all the evidence we've gotten, and I think your staff can confirm this from the county side, it's not like you don't need liability insurance, even if you're a CIB owned operated entity. You do need liability insurance, and the indications that we've gotten are that there's really virtually no difference in cost between liability insurance that would have to be paid annually. So the idea that taxpayers are bearing some annual burden is really, I think, not accurate. I want to comment too on the couple references to things like do things by ourselves from the city administration or take the lead, and just kind of try to clarify what that means. When we say, we've never said we would do this by ourselves. And I just would urge that people read the documents that we have shared and made detailed publicly. And I just referenced today, none of this happens with any single entity. There are 4 public bodies that have to agree to move this forward. There is no way anybody does this by themselves, including the city administration. And that's just kind of a political noise that I'm sorry that people continue to throw around. But we certainly look forward to collaborating very fully with, again, the public bodies, the multiple public bodies that I mentioned. In terms of taking the lead, I do think it's probably accurate to note that the city, with the staff that we have and the experience that we have from controller to economic development to construction experience, et cetera, we do have expertise on staff that is unusual, that is not matched, I think, just because of the nature of the business of what we do. And in terms of helping take the lead in terms of planning and supporting a group. Now, a CIB could fully staff up with its own staff, and that may be what is contemplated. But there has to be very substantial support from professional staff who help make things go. And we are very willing to do that in the context of a 501c3 that's going to need a lot of support to get going and planning and all that stuff, and particularly to move it quickly, which we're enthusiastic about doing quickly. But again, look, I think it's fine if the community, through the councils and through the interested parties, the hoteliers and the innkeepers and the downtown merchants and those who, many of us have been working really hard for many years to make this happen. If the decision is that a CIB a CIB path is the better path, totally fine. We can step back from trying to be staffing, leading, energize, push. And that's okay. Really, it's totally fine. Because I think the last 6 years have demonstrated that the current approach is not particularly efficient or effective. So we have one path. There are now two paths, and I do have to note it's pretty striking to have questions raised about transparency when I mean, we literally didn't even know what was going on this morning, and the vote's done. And so there was no feedback. But anyway, it's fine. CIB is created, move ahead, and we're happy to have the choice between two different paths determined.
I want to add on to that if I can, please. So I've been sharing documents that kind of detail our background and our thought on how our ideas on how to proceed. And that was in an effort to be transparent and collaborative. And so I do have to ask, and I think we're owed an answer, why the cloak and dagger with this CIB announcement and vote this morning? That was just like out of thin air for us. And so I would love to know the thought process behind that.
Cheryl, did you want to comment on anything?
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry for being late to the meeting. I didn't know about the time change until I couldn't possibly get here on time. I am enthusiastic to hear that the CIB proposal has been made. And I think dithering is off the table. I don't know anything. I don't understand about selling land. That is something I missed out on. I'll have to catch up on. Same with liability insurance, and I will catch up on those. But I have been part of the planning for the expanded convention center from the very earliest days when Pat Stopers was county commissioner, and he appointed me to the planning group. And we had many good discussions about how to approach the expansion collaboratively. There was nothing there except enthusiasm and questions as to how this might work. And I think I asked the question, I said, we need a structure, we need a legal framework to put us together. And through our attorneys and others, we identified the Capital Improvement Board. Well, this was new to all of us. We didn't know anything about it. But since then, we have learned that it is the Capital Improvement Board that has been the mechanism for interlocal agreements and building large undertakings. They can do things other than a convention center. But the legislature is the body that created the Capital Improvement Board. And they would not have done so had a 501c3 been an appropriate structure for intergovernmental collaboration and developing a large project. And a lot went into discussions about a CIB when it was first being formed. And here we are just in Bloomington and Monroe County, much smaller operation than what has taken place in Indianapolis and Fort Wayne, other locations. I can't see that a 501c3 is the appropriate way to go, even with promises and articles of incorporation that require an audit. We want the public participation. And that I think is what the Capital Improvement Board affords to everyone. As to who should be taking the lead, it'll be the Capital Improvement Board that'll take the lead. Of course, they'll be working with the city and with the county, but it will be the Capital Improvement Board. And the city and county have plenty of other things to be taken care of than building this expansion. So I'm very happy to see the CIB proposal. I urge city leadership on the council and in the mayor's office to see if you cannot work with the county as was promised by the mayor when we first discussed the food and beverage tax.
With all due respect, my question hasn't been answered. Why the last minute announcement and
That's-
no collaboration, no heads up,
Okay,
nothing?
let me tell you my take on that. We've been talking about the capital improvement board. We talked about it at the last meeting. We've talked about it before. I don't see, this isn't new. This is not new.
I agree. The concept is not new, but this, even staff, your own staff didn't seem to know that this was going to happen this morning. So I just don't understand. That's not a good entree to collaborative and cooperative
Okay.
work. I just don't get it.
What the commissioners did was prepare an ordinance that would then take effect if there was agreement with the city. Now.
Do you not
so
agree that
they're
that
not
would have been a nice
dictating-
thing to have made us aware of ahead of time out of respect? We've
Well-
been sending you documents, we've been reaching out, we've been making phone calls. I just, again,
so
I can leave it here. I think I've made my point.
Okay,
Leave it here.
so I think you all have 6 weeks to review this. I don't think that's a burden. I looked at it as a step forward to getting an actual proposal out there that can be responded to. That's how I see it.
Yeah.
And I was just gonna say, I saw it as removing an obstacle more than anything. I mean, that's before in advance of the meeting. I mean, yeah, the timing wasn't ideal, being just a couple hours before the meeting, but that's when the commissioners meet. And this is when this body meets. And that's the way I look at it. I look at it as this ordinance that I'm looking at really for the first time mandates nothing. All it does is remove an obstacle
Yeah.
that is, and kind of demonstrates that the commissioners are interested and willing to move forward. That's the way I see it, but I can't speak for the
Right.
commissioners.
Yeah, and just to be clear, we may be receiving memos, but things like, oh, we're going to go with a 501c3 certainly was not, we didn't have a conversation about that in advance. We were just told, hey, that's what we're going to do. It was dropped on us, and whether it's dropped in a memo or dropped in an ordinance, we are a legislative and executive body for county government. We're not just executive. So we have a different path. We don't use memos. We just don't. So
Point of
that's,
clarification, that was proposed as a path forward.
well, this is a 6-week proposal.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't want to do it, then let it go and it dies. But we put something concrete on the table rather than bringing something that we're going to say was a proposal. So call it a proposal then, if that's what you'd like to call it, that's fine. It is a proposal and it's on the table for 6 weeks because we want to move forward. And that's why we did it. But we don't operate through memos. We operate through legislation because we are legislative. So that's the difference. It's memo versus ordinance. And that is the point, is to prepare the way to move forward in an effective way together. And that's what we want. We don't want to have one party or the other say, we're in charge. And we do want to see a capital improvement board. Each site has 3 appointments. What could be fairer than that? They pick the 7th member. What could be fairer than that? A bipartisan or nonpartisan group. It really takes all of the burden off of having to try to organize every step of this process. And there's a lot to do. And we all know that there's a lot to do with this process. It doesn't just happen overnight. The other thing I would add is while the mayor has so kindly reminded us of projects and things the city does, the county's been in the convention center business for 30+ years. So we feel like we have experience too, which I think would help us choose the best 3 people to serve on the CIB. And I hope that the city's experience would be utilized in a similar manner to choose the best 3 people to serve on the CIB. and let them go and do their thing and move forward. And that's what we're hoping happens. So I don't know if you have anything else you want to add from the council side?
Well, and with respect to the idea that we all have other things to do, and we do. The community justice issue is huge. And that's another issue that I want to work in collaboration with the county and not trying to manage how that's going to move forward in a responsible and publicly transparent fashion as well. So once again, all I can say is to iterate my commitment as a member of the city council to want to work with you and make sure that this CIB is the absolute best personnel that we can get to stop the dithering, because I don't think any of us want to do that anymore. I don't. I'm kind of, let's get it done. Let's move forward. Let's do it. And then we have other matters of public interest. Both of us do. City does, county does. The more we can do together, in my humble opinion, the better. So I appreciate what you've done this morning. I don't see it as any kind of disrespect. I quite frankly was a little taken aback by the 501c proposal that, all right, we're done, we're done meeting, we're done talking, let's just do it our way. I was very uncomfortable with that. I still am. I don't think that's the way to do business with our colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would just say that this does ask for both the city administration and the city council to give us the nod that you want to continue. And so, I leave it to both entities with the city to make their wishes known to us. And I know there's always a lot on the plate at the end of the year, but 6 weeks is a bit of time. So hopefully that's not a burden. But we really just want to know what direction we're going as soon as we can know. And that's why we chose that date. So, but thank you for that. Anything else? Do you have anything? Oh, yes. Council members, Campbell?
I'll have this replaced. I am reading as fast as I can the ordinance that you shared with us too, but the questions in my head to some extent revolve around next steps. Are you, I'm not seeing it in here, but are you calling for a city council vote to approve? Are you calling for a mayoral action to declare go or no go? I think we're all unified in wanting to move into
Yeah.
a dither-free zone.
Yeah. So section 6 relates to that. And so when we say, so since the project requires City of Bloomington and Monroe County participation, the formation of the CIB and the need for speedy action, this ordinance is contingent upon City of Bloomington's agreement with the terms of this ordinance by January 1st, 2023. And that would include both branches of city government.
So that would be an affirmative action by the mayor and an
And the city
affirmative
council.
action by the city council
To indicate,
to
yes,
indicate
let's do it.
sufficient support for the CIB as how this is written. Got it. Thank you.
You want to say something?
I just wanted to sort of shine a spotlight, I think, on something that Councilor Munson said, that the CIB comes with public input at all stages because it's public. A 501c3 comes with only public review, really, and that's after the fact. And so I really appreciate that kind of point of view and just calling attention to it.
Yeah, go ahead, Mayor. Sure.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much. Look, I have to chuckle a little bit. I mean, the notion that the CIB ordinance, which was passed in about 12 minutes this morning or something, I don't know, with nobody knowing it was coming, the idea that that's a normal way to do business, we had months and months of discussion about all that before, and the idea that says, okay, we're gonna spring it on you or staff. Anyway, I'm just a little nonplussed with that, but that's okay. That's how you operate. I will just say, look, from my perspective, and from my seat, I've spent 6 years trying to get this project done. Many of you have spent that long or longer. Some in the room, I'm sure. I don't know if we're going to have public comment here today because it's useful to have public comment. But from my perspective, it's really a practical decision about what is the most likely way to get this project successfully in an excellent way done. And there's certainly different judgments about that, and that's fine. My judgment is that the experience we've had over the last 6 years does not give me comfort that a CIB approach will work. I've made that clear and happy to talk about that more, but that's fine if other people view that as a better approach. I do want the canard about a 501c3 not being transparent and not open. It can be structured. It is completely flexible. There's nothing wrong with a 501c3. It can be structured however we want to structure it. And again, nothing is being done alone. This would be done with extensive collaboration and cooperation. It can only happen that way. I just think as a practical matter, I'm trying to make a judgment about how to get this thing built in an excellent, efficient way. My judgment is the CIB won't do that well. It's quite likely to be delayed, that the experience both with this project and with other projects that have dragged on for decades without getting the project done counsels me one direction. But if it counsels others another direction, that's fine. And we can, again, step back and let that process work. I do hope it will get done. I do believe the 501c3 is a much more likely success model with all the transparency and all the inclusion. But that's just my view. And, it's based on my perspective. And if others disagree, so be it. And the community can move forward in another direction. But I do think moving forward quickly is quite important. So thanks very much.
Thank you. I would just say that the language in our ordinance should look pretty familiar because it's pretty much what was the last proposal in 2020. So it's we didn't write it fresh. But I would note again that it really is up to the city council and the county council to make a decision about whether a 501c3 or a capital improvement board is the way to go. And both of them have a say in it. And that's who we need to hear from at the appropriate time. So that would be really useful. If you are okay, does anybody else want to say anything, add anything to this conversation? We can hear from the public potentially. I'll have to move the podium.
Super briefly, I just want to thank everybody for participating in this. I still very much believe in this project. I have no interest in repealing or sunsetting the food and beverage tax. I think it's the right funding mechanism for this. I understand that there's been a lot of kind of rancor and back and forth in this meeting. I understand that. But I still do think that the CIB has a lot of advantages from the perspective of public transparency that's already been outlined here. I think it can still work with the city desire to have control over the bonding. I know we didn't really get into that detail, and probably we don't have the right personnel present to get into that level of detail. But I urge everybody to stay with us and to keep working towards a common goal.
Thank you. I would say, and I haven't had a chance to look at this proposal, of course, but I would say the 501c3 proposal has already been successful in a sense, in that at least having that on the table has gotten things moving forward. So that's a step in the right direction.
If I could just say one more thing too about success and excellence. I think we're all capable in a community-wide city council, county council, commissioner, administration manner, expand this convention center in a way that's excellent. I'm for it. I'm very enthusiastic about it in terms of enthusiasm gap. I do happen to think it's an important part of our city's downtown. It's an important part of people coming together and gather. I don't agree with people who say that conventions are going to be dépassé. Nobody wants to come anymore, COVID, whatever. I'm an introvert and I like to gather with people. And I think people are hungry for it, particularly after our 2+ years of hunkering down and being isolated and being on Zoom. People do want to gather. People need to gather. It's kind of a human need. So for those in the community, and I hear from them too, who say, no, convention centers are no longer a thing. It's a waste of money for us to invest in this. I don't agree with that. Because I think I have personally participated in many things here at our convention center that have been valuable, that have been useful, that have been educational. And I think to expand it, to make it better, to make it more of an attraction is a good thing. And for those in the community who don't think that way, I'm happy to talk to them and explain to them why I feel it's an important thing to do. And I don't want to just, throw something out there that is not excellent or is not successful. And I think once again, if we can work together in the spirit of let's do this together, as opposed to somebody does it one way and somebody does it another, I think it's going to end up being a much more successful and a much more excellent project. So that's my opinion. Thank you.
Right, thank you. We don't have the podium set up, but we do have a microphone and a chair. So if anybody wants to offer some brief public comment, they're welcome to do so and come on up and we all know who you are, but just for the viewing audience, if you would introduce yourself, that's
Sure.
helpful. Thank you.
Eric Spoonmore, President of the Greater Bloomington Chamber of Commerce. And I just want to thank you all for convening this meeting today. I know this is a complex project, and with these types of projects, we have to navigate the turbulence before we can get to the clean air. And to me, this meeting today represents some of the most substantive progress that we've made on this expansion in 6 years. And so, whether the final outcome is through this ordinance 2022-46 with a CIB, or whether it's through a 501c3, either option is fine with us. To me, the word of the day is dithering. We just don't want any more dithering with this. And so I think both structures will work well. Obviously, a capital improvement board has had multiple examples of that being successful in the state of Indiana. I think the 501c3 option is a very thoughtful approach, but agree with the Commissioner Thomas and what others have said, that ultimately this is going to come down, I think, to what the county council wants to see and what the city council wants to see. And so just really want to encourage leadership of the county council and leadership of the city council to have an expeditious discussion about this with your colleagues. And I don't know what that outcome looks like, whether it's passing a resolution, sending it back to the commissioners, but something that will demonstrate what you all want to do to move forward. And the chamber wants to be here to support and facilitate those discussions as much as we can. I'm really proud of what happened here today. And I think this has been very constructive. I know not everybody's going to agree. No, but we don't all have to agree. But at the end of the day, what we want is to achieve shared goals that will have a positive impact on the community. And sometimes that's what these discussions look like. So thank you all again. Really, really appreciate all the thoughtful work that you put into this.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any comment to offer? Okay, easy peasy. All right, anything else? Otherwise we can adjourn, and I think we've all had a good conversation. I appreciate hearing from everybody. I think it's good that we sat at the table, even though we didn't think that was going to happen a month ago. So that's a good sign, and let's see where this goes.
Are we going to plan to reconvene? Are we going to plan to reconvene at any time in the near future as a group?
Well, we can leave it to our colleagues. If anybody who's at this table wants to have reconvene and talk through something, let us know. We'll call another meeting. Yeah.
Call a meeting.
Yeah. Okay. It has been created. So, yeah, ready to go forward. Thank you.
Thank you.